The stage burned forever, but we remain to play our parts.
A guilt-ridden playwright returns to the burned ruins of his theater, haunted by the ghosts of his cast. As he obsessively rewrites their final play to seek redemption, the line between art, guilt, and the afterlife blurs in a descent into madness.
The evening air hung heavy with a silence so profound it seemed to swallow even the faintest whisper. Elias Monroe stood at the threshold of the old theater, its once grand facade now a ruinous skeleton etched against the bruised sky. The building's warped arches and shattered windows bore the scars of a fire long past, yet the scent of smoke clung stubbornly to the air, a ghostly residue of that night forever imprinted on the place. His breath came shallow, clouding briefly in the chill as he hesitated, fingers trembling as they brushed the cold iron gate. The theater was no longer a place of applause and light, it was a tomb of memories, a stage suspended in a liminal space where time had fractured and bent. Yet here he was, drawn by a force he neither fully understood nor wished to resist. The ground beneath his worn boots crunched with the detritus of forgotten years, splinters of wood, shards of glass, and scattered pages yellowed with age. As Elias pushed open the heavy doors, a gust of stale air poured out, carrying with it the faintest echo of voices, laughter, and the distant strains of music. The foyer was shrouded in darkness, the remnants of once opulent decor reduced to ash and ruin. Yet amidst the desolation, the theater breathed a slow, pulsing rhythm that seemed to rise from its very foundations. Elias's eyes adjusted to the gloom, catching the faint outlines of rows of broken seats, the remnants of velvet torn and faded. Above, the proscenium arch loomed, charred but unyielding, framing the scarred stage where dreams had burned to cinders. He stepped forward, each footfall stirring motes of dust that danced like fragile specters in the thin shafts of dying light. He paused at the edge of the stage, hand trailing along the roughened wood, feeling the texture of splintered grain and the lingering heat of old flames that had consumed more than just timber. The silence pressed around him, thick and suffocating, yet beneath it lay a subtle vibration and echo of lives once lived and lost within these walls. From the shadows, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a shape, blurred and ethereal, retreating swiftly into darkness. Elias's heart clenched. He knew the theater had never been truly empty. It was a vessel for memories, for souls tethered by tragedy and unfinished business. Drawing a tattered notebook from his coat, Elias sank onto a fractured bench, the wood groaning beneath his weight. He opened the pages, ink faded but familiar, and began to write. The words flowed with a desperate intensity, as if the script itself were a living thing demanding rebirth. His voice, hoarse and low, broke the silence as he muttered lines aloud, calling to ghosts only he could see. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. Figures began to coalesce at the edges of his vision, faint outlines of actors long dead, caught in an eternal performance. Their faces were pale, eyes vacant yet accusing. Elias spoke to them as if they were flesh and blood, his words laced with sorrow and guilt. The theater responded, its walls whispering secrets, its floorboards creaking beneath unseen footsteps. The night stretched endlessly, a fragile thread weaving past and present, reality and dream. Elias was caught in the relentless tide of his obsession, the play that had destroyed him now his sole purpose and torment. And as the first hints of dawn blood through the cracked ceiling, the ghosts lingered, still silent witnesses to a story that refused to end. Outside, the city stirred unaware, the ruined theater standing as a monument to loss and longing, the stage that burned forever in the heart of Elias Monroe. The theater's heavy doors groaned open into the night air, a reluctant portal to a world suspended between decay and memory. Elias Monroe stepped inside, the soles of his worn boots stirring motes of dust that danced like tiny specters in the pale glow of a single flickering bulb overhead. His fingers trembled as they brushed against the cracked surface of the grand oak desk, scarred and warped by time and neglect, a silent witness to the ruin that had become his sanctuary and prison. Tonight marked a turning point. The first full rewrite of the play, the one that had torn his life asunder, was underway. He had returned here, compelled by a force as relentless as the fire that had consumed the original production. His pen hovered over the yellowed pages, then descended with feverish urgency, scratching out lines and weaving new threads into a tapestry stained with regret and longing. The shadows around him began to stir, at first, subtle shifts in the corner of his eye, silhouettes folding into shapes, whispers woven from the breath of the past. Then, more distinctly, the ghostly figures took form. Lena, her eyes shimmering with a translucent glow, moved silently across the broken stage. Aidan, the lead, stood nearby, his ethereal countenance etched with lingering sorrow, remnants of his once vibrant presence fading into the depths of the spectral haze. Elias spoke to them as if they were flesh and blood, his voice a low murmur threading through the stillness. "You were magnificent," he said, his gaze locked on Aidan's haunted eyes. "The best I ever had, but I need it different this time. I need the truth." The ghosts responded not with words, but with silent reenactments, fragments of scenes frozen in a cruel loop. Their faces held the pain and anger of lives abruptly shattered, the echoes of screams and flames etched into their very essence. Elias's heart clenched with every movement, yet his fingers continued to scratch out notes, desperate to mend what had been broken. A sudden creak drew his attention. Clara stepped into the theater, her presence a warm contrast to the chill that clung to the ruins. Her eyes searched his face, soft but firm. "Elias, this has to stop," she pleaded, voice trembling with a mixture of love and fear. "You re-losing yourself in this place, in these ghosts. They re-not alive. You need to let them and yourself go." He turned to her, a fleeting shadow of pain crossing his features. "You don't understand," he whispered. "If I don't rewrite, if I don't find the truth in these words, they'll never rest. Neither will I." Clara reached for his hand, but he pulled away, retreating into the shadows where the ghosts danced their silent torment. The theater seemed to breathe with a life of its own, the dust swirling like embers caught in an unseen wind, carrying with it the weight of lost dreams and unspoken apologies. As the night deepened, Aidan's gaze found Elias's again, more intense, more accusing. The air thickened with unsaid words and unresolved grief. Elias felt the crushing weight of his guilt, the desperate yearning to rewrite history, to write the irreparable. Yet, in the heart of the ruin, the line between reality and hallucination blurred. Was he the playwright or the prisoner? The creator or the condemned? Each word penned was a step deeper into the labyrinth of his own making, where art and pain entwined in a dance as old as time. Clara's voice echoed once more, a fragile thread pulling at the edges of his fractured mind. But Elias was already lost to the shadows, to the ghosts, to the relentless echo of the past that refused to fade. The night stretched on, a canvas painted with sorrow and obsession. And on the ruined stage, the play began anew. The question lingered like smoke in the still air. How far would Elias go to find redemption in the ashes of his creation? The answer, like the ghosts themselves, remained just beyond reach. The theater was a cavern of shadows and whispers, its broken seats and crumbling walls swallowed by darkness, yet alive with a spectral pulse that Elias could neither deny nor fully comprehend. He stood in the center of the ruined stage, script in trembling hands, eyes fixed on the flickering apparitions that had begun their nightly ritual. They moved silently, their forms fragile and fractured like stained glass cracked and held together by some invisible thread, each ghost a shard of pain and memory. The spectral cast reenacted fragments of the play that had destroyed them, their movements jerky yet filled with a raw, aching emotion. Lena's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she mouthed silent words, her face an open book of sorrow. Harold lingered near the dim wings, a shadow among shadows, the weight of the theater's history etched into his worn expression. Elias watched, heart pounding, as the ghosts' faces flickered between anguish and longing, their secrets spilling out in broken scenes that no living soul had ever seen. These performances were not mere echoes, they were confessions. The ghosts revealed torments that had remained buried beneath the surface, unspoken fears, regrets, and betrayals intertwined with the fabric of the play. Elias' breath hitched as he recognized fragments of himself in their torment. the guilt that had shackled him since the fire, now a living, breathing entity before his eyes. The theater was no longer just a ruin. It was a crucible where pain and art fused, each spectral act a shard of Elias's fractured soul. From the darkness of the back rows, a sharp voice shattered the fragile veil of the ghostly performance. "This obsession will be your undoing, Elias." Marcus stepped forward, his dark suit a stark contrast against the faded velvet seats. His gaze was piercing, filled with bitter accusation. "You're rechasing ghosts literally and figuratively and dragging the rest of us down with you. This theater, this play, your torment, it's time to let it go." Elias's hands clenched the script tighter, knuckles whitening. "You don't understand. I have to do this. I have to fix what went wrong." "Fix?" Marcus scoffed, stepping closer. "You're tearing yourself apart. The past is dead, Elias. You're the only one who hasn't accepted it." The tension crackled like static electricity as Elias's gaze flickered to the stage once more. The ghosts had paused, their hollow eyes watching the confrontation unfold. Adon, the lead ghost, stepped forward, his pale figure more defined than ever, his haunting eyes locked onto Elias's, a silent accusation that pierced deeper than Marcus's words. Elias felt the weight of Adon's gaze settle upon him, a reminder of the friendship and trust shattered by the fire. Pain welled up, threatening to overwhelm him. The ghosts were not mere phantoms. They embodied every secret, every regret he had tried to bury. And now, they demanded reckoning. As Marcus's voice faded into the heavy silence, Elias's mind swirled with images, flames licking at the curtains, screams swallowed by smoke. The faces of his wife and Aiden etched forever in agony. The theater around him seemed to breathe, its cracked walls pulsating with the memories of that night. He was trapped between the living and the dead, the past and the present, caught in a liminal space where art and pain collided. Lena glided forward, her translucent hand reaching toward Elias, a silent plea for acknowledgement. Harold's shadow shifted, the faint creak of old floorboards echoing like a heartbeat. The ghosts were not just performers. They were witnesses and victims, their stories intertwined irrevocably with Elias's own. The night stretched on, the line between the spectral and the real blurring with each passing moment. The ghosts' fragmented scenes grew more vivid, their whispered voices threading through the dark like a mournful song. Elias's obsession spiraled further, pulling him away from Clara's faint but persistent calls from the outside world and deeper into the theater's haunted embrace. Marcus's confrontation lingered in the air like a challenge. Could Elias break free from the prison of his guilt and obsession, or would he be consumed entirely by the shadows and secrets that had risen from the ashes? As the ghosts faded with the first light of dawn, Elias remained alone on the ruined stage, the weight of his past pressing heavy against his chest. The script's blank pages whispering promises of both salvation and destruction. And somewhere beyond the shattered walls, the theater waited, patient and eternal, for the next act to begin. The theater was a cavern of shadows and whispers, its broken beams and shattered windows swallowing the faint light that filtered through the thick dust. Elias Monroe sat hunched over his battered desk, the edges stained with years of neglect and the ghost of cigarette burns. His pen scratched feverishly across the yellowing pages, each word a desperate attempt to rewrite a past that would not relent. Around him, the air was restless, a cold, palpable presence that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. From the darkness at the edge of his vision, a shape began to take form. At first, it was a shimmer, a distortion like heat rising from a summer road, but then it solidified into something far more chilling. Adan, the lead actor, the friend lost in the fire that destroyed more than just a stage, stood before him. Pale as moonlight, his eyes glowing with a terrible light that pierced the gloom. His costume hung in tatters, remnants of a life half-lived and forever trapped in the theater's ruins. Elias did not flinch. He barely breathed. The obsession that had gripped him for so long now bound him tighter than chains. "You shouldn't be here," Elias muttered, voice rough as gravel. "You re-dead, all of you?" Adan's gaze was steady, unyielding. "Am I?" His voice was soft but carried the weight of accusation, a sorrow that seemed to seep into the very walls. I am here because you brought me back, because you cannot let us go. The room seemed to constrict, the shadows thickening as Adon stepped closer, the faint scent of smoke and ash trailing behind him. Elias's fingers trembled, but he clung to his pen, the only anchor to the reality he still claimed. This play, Adon said, it is not a story you can rewrite to ease your conscience. You think changing the lines, altering the scenes, will bring peace, but it only drags us deeper into the fire, into the pain you refuse to face. Elias's jaw clenched, a flash of anger sparking in his haunted eyes. I have to try, for her, for you, for all of you. Trying isn't enough, Adon whispered, stepping back into the shadows, where the rest of the spectral cast began to emerge, their faces etched with silent suffering. They reenacted the final moments of that ill-fated night, the rising panic, the shattered trust, the flames licking at their dreams. The theater breathed with their pain, its timbers groaning under the weight of memory. It was a living monument to loss and regret, and Elias was caught within its grasp, a prisoner of his own making. He sank to the floor, the cold wood pressing against his hands as the ghosts circled him, their silent accusations like knives. The line between reality and the spectral performance thinned until it vanished altogether. Elias's mind fractured, shards of memory and nightmare piercing the darkness. Why won't you let us rest? Aiden's voice was a thread weaving through the chaos, a plea and a condemnation. Elias's breath hitched. Because I'm still searching for forgiveness. There is no forgiveness here, Adon replied, only the weight of obsession. And that weight will crush you if you let it. The theater pulsed with a raw energy, grief, rage, love, and despair intertwined in a dance as old as time. Elias closed his eyes, the ghost's laments wrapping around him like a shroud. Somewhere in the depths of his fractured soul, a sliver of understanding began to take root, fragile but real. But the path ahead was still shrouded in darkness, and the stage that burned forever was far from silent. As the night deepened, the ruins echoed with the sound of a pen scratching against paper, the relentless heartbeat of a man caught between creation and destruction. Elias's obsession was no longer just a torment, it was a reckoning. The heavy door groaned under its own weight as Clara pushed it open, the faint creak slicing through the oppressive silence of the ruined theater. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of light that filtered through the shattered windows, casting ghostly halos around her cautious steps. Her heart pounded with a mixture of dread and determination as she moved deeper into the cavernous space, each footfall echoing like a plea for Elias to hear her. There he was, a solitary figure hunched over a battered wooden table strewn with yellowed pages and ink-stained scripts. His hair was unkempt, strands clinging to his pale forehead damp with sweat. The hollow sockets beneath his eyes spoke volumes of sleepless nights and relentless torment. Yet, despite the ruin that clung to him like a second skin, those haunted eyes blazed with an intensity that both frightened and fascinated Clara. Elias, she whispered, her voice trembling yet steady. He did not look up immediately, his fingers tracing lines of text, as if seeking salvation in the ink. When his gaze finally met hers, it was like staring into a void where hope and despair wrestled endlessly. Clara, he breathed, a ghost of a smile flickering and fading. You shouldn't have come. She stepped closer, the chill of the theater biting through her thin coat. I had to. I can't stand to see you like this, trapped, unraveling. This obsession is killing you. Let me help you, please. He shook his head, voice low and cracked. It's not obsession, it's redemption. I have to fix what I broke. The play, the fire, them. Her eyes filled with tears, but her tone hardened. You can't rewrite the past, Elias. And you're not alone anymore. You have me. For a moment, silence hung between them, thick and suffocating. Then the sound of heavy footsteps shattered the fragile stillness. Marcus appeared at the entrance, his dark suit a stark contrast against the peeling walls and scattered debris. His face was a mask of bitter resolve. Enough, he said sharply, voice echoing with authority. This theater and this madness have to end. You sinking deeper into delusion. It's time to face reality and move on. Elias's jaw clenched, fists balled at his sides. You don't understand, this is the only way I can atone. Marcus's eyes narrowed, a tone, You re-destroying yourself and everyone around you. The world's moved on, Elias. So should you. Clara stepped between them, placing a gentle hand on Elias's arm. Let's find another way, she urged softly. But Elias pulled away, voice rising with desperate conviction. No, I must finish this. For them. For me. Marcus let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Then you were truly lost. With that, Marcus turned and strode away, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Clara looked at Elias with a mixture of sorrow and hope, reaching out once more. Don't let this be the end, she whispered. Elias's eyes drifted to the faint shimmer of spectral light gathering in the shadows, ghostly forms flickering like flames in a dying hearth. The voices of the past called to him, a siren song of pain and remembrance. He stood alone amid the ruins, torn between the tether of reality Clara offered and the consuming fire of his own obsession. The night deepened, wrapping the theater in a cloak of shadows and silence. But within Elias, a storm raged on, unyielding, relentless, and unresolved. As Clara's footsteps faded, the theater seemed to breathe, alive with the weight of memory and the fragile hope of salvation. And Elias, caught between worlds, prepared for the next act of his relentless performance. The theater loomed like a cavernous wound beneath the dim, flickering lights that hung precariously from rusted chains above the stage. Elias Monroe stood at its center, his fingers clutching the fragile, worn script as though it were a lifeline. Around him, phantoms of the past stirred, ghostly actors flickering in and out of existence, their forms fragmented, voices fractured like shards of a broken mirror. The first whispers began softly, a tremulous murmur threading through the air like a forgotten melody. Then the voices grew, overlapping in a dissonant chorus of pain and rage. Elias's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of their agony settling upon him with a suffocating force. He forced himself to breathe deeply, trying to anchor his fraying mind to the present, yet the ghost's torment seeped into the very walls, twisting the theater into a living monument of grief. From the shadowed wings emerged Lena, her spectral form barely more than a shimmer against the cracked plaster and peeling paint. Her eyes, soft and distant, held the fragile glow of a forgotten dream. She moved with a silent grace, drifting across the splintered floorboards as if searching for something lost between the echoes of time. Near the back, Harold lingered. The stagehand ghost was a shadow among shadows, his indistinct figure an enduring presence that spoke of the theater's layered history. Elias watched him with a mixture of reverence and despair, sensing in Harold's quiet endurance the weight of countless memories folded within the forgotten corners of the ruined space. Elias's pen scratched furiously across the pages, the frantic scrawl of his revisions a desperate attempt to soothe the restless spirits. Sweat beaded on his forehead, dampening the paper as he chased elusive words that might mend the fractures in the story and perhaps in himself. But with every line rewritten, the ghost's anguish only deepened. Their fragmented performances shattered the fragile narrative he tried to weave, revealing rifts not just in the play but in Elias's own psyche. Aidan, the lead ghost, appeared suddenly at the edge of the stage, his pale, ethereal eyes burning with sorrow and accusation. His voice rose a raw, jagged sound that cut through the thick silence like shattered glass. The other actors joined him, their cries overlapping in a chaotic crescendo of grief, rage, and longing. The theater trembled with their collective torment, the air thick with the scent of smoke and ash, memories of fire and loss blending with the present. Elias staggered back, overwhelmed by the intensity of their pain. His hands trembled as he clutched the script, realization dawning that no amount of rewriting could fully erase the ghost's suffering or his own guilt. The fractures ran too deep, woven into the very fabric of the play and his soul, yet beneath the chaos, a fragile thread of hope persisted, faint, elusive. Lena's silent presence, Harold's steadfast vigil, the very act of repetition itself whispered of the possibility of redemption through acceptance rather than control. Elias's obsession wavered, caught between the desperate desire to fix the past and the dawning awareness of his limits. The spectral actors faded slowly as the echoes of their cries dissipated into the cold air. The theater fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the ragged breaths of a man wrestling with the weight of his own creation. Elias sank to the floorboards, the script crumpled in his grasp, and for a moment, the relentless cycle seemed poised on the brink of transformation. But the night was far from over, and the shadows still held their secrets. Elias knew that to face the ghosts and himself he would have to delve deeper into the fragments of performance and pain that haunted the stage that burned forever. As the silence stretched, a single line of dialogue echoed in his mind, fragile yet defiant, "We are not finished." The theater waited breathless for what would come next. The theater was silent save for the faint creak of the ancient wood and the distant whisper of a restless wind threading through the broken panes. Elias Monroe sat hunched at the center of the stage, his thin fingers clutching the tattered pages of his play, the ink smudged from countless rewrites. The dim glow of a lone lamp cast long shadows, flickering uneasily against the cracked walls, as if the building itself hesitated to witness what was to come. A presence stirred in the far darkness beyond the proscenium arch, a chill crawling through the air. Elias' breath caught, his eyes darting to the shifting shadows. Slowly, deliberately, a pale figure emerged, his form shimmering with an otherworldly light. Aidan, the lead ghost, stepped forward, the remnants of his stage costume hanging loosely from his spectral frame, his eyes, haunting and luminous, fixed unflinchingly on Elias. "You summoned me." Aidan's voice was a hollow echo, reverberating through the empty theater, the timbre thick with sorrow and accusation. "Why do you drag us back into this endless torment?" Elias swallowed hard, the weight of years pressing down on his chest like a vise. I had to try, to fix it. To make it right, fix it." Aidan's eyes narrowed. "By dragging the dead through the ashes of your obsession, by rewriting the pain instead of living it." The words hung heavy, each syllable a shard piercing Elias's fragile denial. He clenched the script tighter, knuckles white, as memories surged unbidden flames licking at the edges of his mind, the screams, the suffocating smoke, and the hollow ache of loss. "I never wanted this," Elias whispered, voice cracking. "I just wanted to tell the story the way it should have been told." "You wanted to tell it," Aidan said, stepping closer, "but you never wanted to hear us. To see the cost." A faint murmur rose from the rafters, a chorus of whispered laments from the spectral cast, their ethereal forms flickering like candlelight in the gloom. Elias felt their sorrow seep into his bones, an unbearable weight pressing down. "You blame me," Elias said shakily, "but you were part of it. We all were." "And yet you alone write the script that traps us," Aidan replied, voice low but resolute. "You hold the pen that binds us here." A silence fell between them, thick and suffocating, as the theater seemed to pulse with the breath of old wounds. Elias's eyes darted around the empty seats, as if seeking an escape, but the shadows closed in tighter. "I can't stop," Elias confessed, the admission tearing through his defenses. "I have to keep rewriting. It's the only way I can find peace." "Peace isn't found in repetition," Aidan said softly, "but in acceptance." The words struck a chord deep within Elias, reverberating through the fractured corridors of his mind. His control, once so absolute, began to falter. The script in his hands felt heavier, the ink bleeding like fresh wounds. "You don't understand," Elias murmured, tears blurring his vision. "If I let go, all is lost." "Some things must be lost," Aidan said, stepping back into the shadows, for new beginnings to take root. As Aidan's form dissolved into the darkness, the theater breathed a long, mournful sigh. Elias was left alone on the ruined stage, the echoes of the confrontation ringing in his ears. The first cracks had appeared in the fortress of his obsession, but whether they would herald redemption or ruin remained uncertain. He glanced once more at the pages before him, the ink shimmering like blood, and for the first time, the lines between creator and creation blurred in a trembling dance of pain and possibility. Outside, the night deepened, and the theater waited, silent and watchful, for the next act to begin. The cracked planks beneath Elias's feet groaned under the weight of silence, a silence so thick it seemed to swallow the faintest whisper of sound. The air was cold, stale from years of abandonment, carrying the bitter scent of smoke and dust like a stubborn ghost clinging to memory. Elias sat stage center, the dim, fractured light of a lone, sputtering bulb casting long, trembling shadows that danced like specters on the peeling walls. Around him, pages scattered like fallen leaves, their edges curled and stained with the ink of his fevered rewrites. His fingers trembled as they sifted through the script's fragments of a story that refused to stay dead. He glanced up, eyes haunted and hollow, as if the darkness behind his gaze held the weight of years of regret. The ghostly murmurs that filled the theater were not imagined. They were echoes of a past he could neither escape nor fully remember. A cold draft whispered through the broken windows, carrying the faintest hint of a voice soft, accusing, lingering like smoke in a room long since burned. Footsteps echoed lightly, hesitant, and Clara appeared at the edge of the stage. Her presence was a fragile thread of warmth in the icy desolation. She stepped closer, her soft features etched with worry, eyes alight with a fierce tenderness born of desperation. "Elias," she breathed, voice trembling yet steady, "you have to stop this. This place is killing you. You're killing yourself." He shook his head slowly, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "I can't," he whispered, voice cracked by exhaustion and denial. "Not yet. Not until I make it right." Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she reached out, fingertips brushing his arm, an anchor thrown into his storm. "You're drowning in ghosts," she said softly. "Let me help you float." But Elias recoiled, the ghost of a shadow flickering behind his eyes. "There is no help," he murmured, voice fading. "Only this. Only the play, the fire, the pain. I have to see it through." Before Clara could respond, the sharp click of polished shoes echoed through the theater's hollow bones. Marcus emerged from the shadows, his silhouette sharp and imposing against the crumbling backdrop. His eyes were cold, judgmental, burning with the fire of practicality and bitterness. "Stop this madness, Elias," Marcus barked, voice slicing through the fragile moment. "This theater, this obsession, it's a ruin, and so are you. You're destroying what little you have left. I'm closing this place down if you don't pull yourself together." Elias's eyes flickered with a flash of anger, but it was quickly swallowed by despair. "You don't understand," he said hoarsely. "This is all I have left. The play, the ghosts, they won't let me go." Marcus scoffed, stepping closer. "You're a prisoner of your own guilt. Let go, or be consumed." The tension thickened, the air heavy with unspoken accusations and shattered dreams. Then from the periphery, a pale figure emerged, ethereal and haunting Aidan, the lead ghost, his eyes deep wells of sorrow. His stage costume hung in tatters, drifting like smoke around him. Elias froze, the weight of Aidan's gaze pressing upon him like a physical force. The ghost's torment was no longer distant. It was immediate, suffocating. The past and present collided in a storm of memory and pain. "Why do you keep us here?" Aidan's voice was a whisper and a roar, filled with anguish and accusation. Elias's breath hitched. "I'm trying to fix it," he said, voice barely audible. "You're only binding us tighter," Aidan replied, eyes darkening. "This cycle, this endless repetition, it's your prison as much as ours." The theater seemed to pulse with their shared pain, the walls trembling as if alive. Elias's mind fractured, swinging between clarity and chaos. He saw the faces of those lost his wife, his friend etched in spectral light. He felt the unbearable weight of guilt crush him, and yet the flicker of hope, fragile and fleeting, whispered of redemption. Clara stepped forward again, her voice breaking through the tempest. "Please, Elias, choose life, choose peace." But Elias only shook his head, lost in the fractured reflections of his soul. Marcus watched, his expression grim. "You're spiraling," he said coldly. "And I won't let you drag everyone down with you." The tension snapped like a taut wire, the theater echoing with the sound of a man breaking inside. Elias's world shattered into fragments past and present, reality and nightmare, love and loss all colliding in a kaleidoscope of pain. And yet, somewhere in the chaos, a faint ember glowed, a promise that even in the deepest despair, the possibility of redemption might still flicker. But for now, Elias was lost, caught in the fracture of his own making, the haunted echoes of the stage that burned forever. The night stretched on, the theater breathing its heavy, sorrowful breath, waiting for the dawn that might never come. The air in the ruined theater thickened, pregnant with a silence so dense it felt like a living thing. Elias Monroe stood center stage, his breath shallow and ragged, eyes fixed on the splintered rafters above. Then, as if summoned by his torment, the shadows flickered and danced. The faintest glimmers of spectral flames licked the broken beams, casting a ghostly glow that pulsed with unnatural life. From the darkness, the actors emerged pale, translucent, their faces etched with the torment of final moments lived over and over. Adon, the lead ghost, stepped forward first, his ethereal costume tattered but unmistakable, his haunting eyes locked with Elias's, reflecting a storm of accusation and sorrow. The theater filled with the tremulous echoes of screams and shattered hopes, a chorus of pain that clawed at Elias's heart. The flames spread, swirling in impossible patterns, illuminating the faces of the spectral cast as they reenacted the catastrophic fire that had consumed them. Lena moved silently among the chaos, her hands reaching out to touch the crumbling walls, the coldness of ash and ruin seeping through her fingers. Her expression was one of mute grief, a sorrow too deep for words. She was a ghost bound by memory, mourning what could never be reclaimed. Elias staggered forward, compelled and terrified. He reached out to Adon, whose gaze softened momentarily into something almost like forgiveness. But the weight of unspoken blame hung heavy between them. "Why do you still come back?" Elias whispered, voice cracking. The ghost did not answer but instead turned toward the flames, beckoning Elias to witness the destruction once more. The theater's atmosphere thickened, the boundary between past and present dissolving. The heat of the phantom fire was felt on Elias's skin, an inferno of memory searing through his flesh and soul. The screams of his lost wife and the original cast echoed in his ears, a relentless reminder of his failure and guilt. Each scene unfolded with terrifying clarity, the actors' movements a painful dance of agony and regret. Harold, the ghostly stagehand, appeared by the trapdoor, his form a shadow among shadows. His voice was a fragile murmur, threading ancient secrets of the theater's spirit through the chaos. "The place remembers," he whispered, "and so do we." Elias's mind teetered on the brink of collapse, torn between the desire to flee and the compulsion to witness every moment. His obsession had summoned this living nightmare, and now it demanded reckoning. The ghosts were not merely phantoms of the past, but fragments of his own fractured soul, each carrying a shard of the pain he refused to face. The flames flickered wildly as the spectral actors reached the final, tragic moments of their story. Elias's vision blurred, tears mingling with sweat as he realized the cycle was more than repetition. It was a prison forged from his own guilt and denial. Yet beneath the despair, a fragile ember of hope flickered a chance, perhaps, for redemption through the endless night. As the last echoes of the fire died away, the theater fell into a heavy silence, broken only by Elias's ragged breathing. The ghosts lingered, their faces etched with sorrow and longing, waiting for the next rewrite, the next performance that would either set them free or bind them forever. Elias sank to the floor, the weight of memory pressing him down. "I will find a way," he vowed to the shadows, "somehow." But as the darkness closed in, the question remained: how much of himself would he lose before the nightmare finally ended? The theater's walls seemed to pulse with quiet anticipation, the stage that burned forever alive with the ghosts of yesterday and the fragile hope of tomorrow. The theater was silent. Not the kind of silence that follows the frantic bustle of a scene's end, or the whispered muttering of actors preparing backstage, but a heavy, oppressive quiet that seemed to settle into every crevice of the ruined hall. Dust motes floated in the thin shafts of pale moonlight that slipped through the broken windows, casting long shadows across the cracked floorboards and peeling walls. Elias Monroe sat alone in the center of the stage, his fingers wrapped loosely around the worn edges of his notebook. For once, it remained closed. The air was thick with absence. The ghosts, those spectral remnants of a past saturated in pain and regret, lingered just beyond clear view, faint, flickering figures caught between worlds. Adan, the lead ghost, drifted slowly into the spotlight's ghostly glow, his pale form outlined against the darkened backdrop. His eyes, deep pools of sorrow and accusation, locked onto Elias with a silent intensity that made the playwright's heart constrict. Elias's breath came slow and uneven. The compulsive itch to rewrite, to reshape the past through endless pages scrawled in fading ink, had finally ebbed. Instead of the frantic scratching of pen on paper, there was only the whisper of silence and the distant echo of memories too heavy to bear. The ghosts were not silent, though. Their presence was a palpable weight, in the still air a chorus of unspoken grief and longing. Lena, the delicate actress whose spectral form shimmered like a fragile wisp of smoke, moved silently through the shadows of the wings, her eyes cast downward as if mourning an irretrievable loss. Harold, the stagehand ghost, glided through the aisles, his indistinct shape a reminder of the theater's enduring spirit, both a witness and prisoner of the unfolding tragedy. Elias's gaze drifted upward, taking in the tattered curtains hanging limply, the broken chandeliers swaying faintly as if stirred by an unseen breath. The theater was a mausoleum of shattered dreams, a monument to an ambition that had consumed everything it touched. For a long moment, he simply sat, the silence pressing in around him like a physical force. His mind, usually a torrent of ideas and frantic revisions, slowed to a tentative stillness. The weight of his failures, the lives lost, the love destroyed, the art that had devoured him settled over him like ash. "Why," he whispered, voice raw and fragile, "did I keep writing?" Adam's form shifted closer, the faintest outline of a gesture, an extended hand, a plea for acknowledgement hovering in the air. Elias's eyes filled with tears, the dam of long-suppressed guilt breaking free. The ghosts did not need words. Their presence said everything. They were the embodiment of his remorse, the living scars of his obsession. The silence deepened, a delicate balance between the past and present, between the living and the dead. Elias's fingers trembled as they moved to close the notebook with a soft thud. The act was small, but monumental, a surrender, a recognition that some stories could not be rewritten to undo the damage. Outside, the night held its breath. Inside, the theater waited, suspended between ruin and redemption. As Elias rose slowly from the stage, the ghosts receded into the darkness, their forms growing dimmer but no less real. The silence remained, but it no longer felt like a shackle. It was a space for mourning, for memory, and perhaps for the first fragile step toward peace. Yet even in this quiet, a question lingered unspoken. Could Elias truly accept the weight of his past, or would the silence be shattered once more by the restless echo of obsession? The stage was empty now, but the story was far from over. And as Elias stepped into the shadowed corridors of the theater, the faintest flicker of hope stirred within him, fragile and uncertain as the dawn yet to come. The night stretched on, heavy with the weight of silence, but beneath it lay the trembling pulse of possibility, an ember waiting to be kindled. Elias knew the path ahead would be long and fraught with pain, but for the first time in years, he felt the faintest stirrings of clarity. He would face the ghosts. He would confront the past, and perhaps, in the stillness, find the redemption he so desperately sought. The theater held its breath, and the story waited to begin anew. The theater lay draped in silence, the heavy dust motes drifting like ghosts in the bleak shafts of pale light that dared to enter through cracked windows. Elias sat hunched over the scattered pages of his script, the ink bleeding into smudges beneath his restless fingers. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten dreams. It was here, in the ruin of his own making, that Clara found him once again, her footsteps tentative but resolute against the hollow echoes. She paused a few feet away, her eyes tracing the worn contours of his face, etched with exhaustion and haunted by memories too deep for words. "Elias," she began softly, voice barely more than a whisper, "you don't have to carry this alone." He looked up, those dark, haunted eyes meeting hers with a flicker of recognition and pain. "I have to," he replied, voice rough like gravel. "It's the only way I can make sense of it all." Clara stepped closer, her presence a balm and a storm all at once. "But at what cost? You think this obsession saves them, saves you, but it's breaking us both. I've given so much that you never saw." A tremor passed through her, a fragile tremble of raw emotion. "I stayed away for years," she confessed, because it hurt too much to watch you burn. But I never stopped hoping you'd come back to me, to the world we once dreamed of." Elias's gaze faltered, the weight of her words pressing against the walls of his defenses. "I'm so sorry, Clara," he murmured, voice cracking under the strain of unspoken regrets. "I never meant to drag you into this." She shook her head, a sad smile touching her lips. "You did drag me in, but I stayed because I love you, because I believe there's still light somewhere beneath all this darkness." For a moment, the ghosts that haunted the theater seemed to hold their breath, the pale figures of the spectral cast shimmering faintly in the periphery, their silent sorrow reflecting the fragile hope blossoming between the two living souls. Elias reached out, fingers trembling as they hovered near hers, hesitant to bridge the chasm forged by years of pain and silence. Yet, just as their hands seemed destined to meet, he recoiled, retreating into the sanctuary of his scripts, the endless rewriting that had become both his prison and his penitence. "I can't," he whispered, eyes averted. "Not yet." Clara's heart clenched, understanding the depth of his torment, yet aching to pull him back from the brink. "Then I'll wait," she said softly, her voice a vow wrapped in sorrow, "but I won't give up on you." The theater seemed to exhale, a subtle shift in the air as if acknowledging the fragile thread of hope woven through the despair. Outside, the wind stirred the broken leaves, carrying with it whispers of redemption and the promise of dawn. Yet within, Elias remained locked in his relentless cycle, the ghosts of the past circling ever closer, and Clara's sacrifice lingering like a fragile flame in the darkness. As the night deepened, the script lay open once more, Elias's pen poised to carve new paths through old wounds. The stage awaited its next act, one of sorrow, sacrifice, and a fragile hope that perhaps, one day, the cycle might finally be broken. But for now, the theater held its breath, caught between the past and the possibility of redemption, and Clara's love remained a quiet beacon against the consuming shadows. The night's silence was broken only by the soft scratching of Elias's pen, a sound that whispered both torment and the faintest promise of salvation. And somewhere, in the darkness beyond the broken stage, the ghosts watched and waited. The theater seemed to sag under the weight of its own history. Dust motes hung in the stale air, drifting lazily through the shafts of dim light that pierced the cracked windows. Elias Monroe stood alone in the lobby, the faded grandeur of peeling wallpaper and shattered glass a cruel reminder of what once was. His fingers trembled as he clutched the latest draft of his script, worn pages creased and stained with sweat and ink. The silence was broken by the sharp click of heels Marcus's arrival. Marcus entered with a purposeful stride, the dark suit he wore absorbing the dull light, his eyes cold and unyielding. "Elias," he said, voice tight, "this has to end. The theater is a ruin, a danger to anyone who sets foot inside. The city council is ready to revoke the license. You need to let go." Elias's jaw clenched, eyes flickering with exhaustion and defiance. "You don't understand," he whispered, voice hoarse. "This theater, this play, it's all I have left. I'm close, Marcus, close to fixing it. Fixing you, redestroying yourself," Marcus snapped, stepping closer, his breath sharp with accusation. "You redragging everyone down with you. You think the ghosts will forgive you? They're not forgiving, Elias. They retrapped just like you." The flickering fluorescent bulb overhead sputtered, casting jittery shadows that danced across Marcus's face, making him appear less human, more specter. Elias took a shaky breath, trying to steady the storm inside. "I have to try." Marcus shook his head, disgust mingling with pity. "Then you were lost." The confrontation left Elias hollow, the echoes of Marcus's words bouncing through the empty halls. He retreated deeper into the theater, the warped boards of the stage creaking beneath his feet. The ghostly cast was already assembling in the dim light, spectral forms flickering like candle flames in the darkness. Suddenly, the stage erupted into chaos. The ghosts performed a violent, fragmented reenactment of the fire that had claimed their lives. Flames licked the edges of the stage, though no real fire burned. The air thickened with heat and smoke, the screams of the spectral actors overlapping in a cacophony of pain and terror. Elias stood frozen, watching the nightmare unfold, his heart pounding, his mind fracturing. Lena appeared at his side, her pale eyes wide with silent sorrow. Harold's shadow moved across the backdrop, the weight of the theater's history pressing down on every breath. Elias's hands shook as he tried to rewrite the script in his mind, desperate to soothe the ghost's torment. Later that night, Clara came to him. Her presence was a balm to his frayed nerves, soft and steady against the wild tempest consuming him. She found him in the back room, surrounded by scattered pages and empty bottles. "Elias," she said gently, "you don't have to do this alone. You can stop. You can find peace." He looked up, eyes haunted and wild. "I can't, Clara. If I stop, they'll be lost forever. And so will I." She reached out, taking his hand in hers, warm and real. "You're holding on to pain, not to them. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means healing." But Elias pulled away, clutching his script like a lifeline. "I have to keep going." The next hours passed in oppressive silence. Elias sat alone on the stage, murmuring lines to himself, the words blurring into a stream of consciousness. Shadows twisted and lengthened, merging with his fractured thoughts. The theater seemed alive, breathing around him, a living relic caught between destruction and salvation. His mind spiraled deeper, the boundary between memory and nightmare dissolving. The ghost's cries echoed through the empty space, a haunting symphony of grief and rage. Elias's hands bled from frantic scribbling, eyes wild with obsession. In the depths of the night, as the first light of dawn threatened the darkness, Elias whispered to the empty seats, "I will make it right. I will bring you peace." But the theater held its breath, waiting for redemption, for release, or for the final breaking point. The cycle tightened around Elias like a noose, the ghost's torment growing with each passing moment. Outside, the world pressed in with cold, hard reality, embodied by Marcus's relentless campaign to shut down the theater and erase its painful memories. Elias stood at the crossroads of obsession and surrender, the weight of his past heavier than ever. Would he find the strength to break free, or would the stage that burned forever consume him whole? The theater groaned, the shadows lengthened, and the ghosts whispered in the dark. The breaking point was near. The air in the ruined theater was thick with dust and memory, the faint scent of old wood and faded velvet, pressing against Elias's senses like a tangible weight. As he stepped cautiously through the debris-strewn aisles, the floorboards groaned beneath his thin-soled shoes, a low, mournful sound that seemed to echo the theater's own weary breath. The cavernous space stretched before him, cavernous and hollow, yet alive in a way that defied its ruin. It was not merely a building. It was a vessel of echoes, a crucible where past and present mingled, and where pain and art were forever entwined. Elias's eyes, hollow beneath dark circles, scanned the dimness, catching glimpses of the stage once vibrant with life, now a skeletal frame shrouded in shadows. Faint motes of dust drifted in the slanting shafts of moonlight that filtered through cracked windows, catching the pale glow like tiny stars suspended in stillness. A chill brushed his skin, and in the corner of his vision, he caught movement, a flicker, a shimmer, a presence that made his breath hitch. Harold appeared again. The stagehand ghost was no more than a pale wisp of a man, dressed in tattered remnants of the old stage crew uniform, the fabric hanging loose and faded. His eyes were deep wells of sorrow, hollow yet somehow filled with a quiet endurance that spoke of countless nights spent in service to the theater's will. He moved with a deliberate grace, gliding over the cracked floorboards as if tethered to the theater's very soul. Elias watched, heart pounding with a mixture of awe and dread. Harold was more than a ghost. He was the theater's breath, its pulse, its lingering spirit. Each time he appeared, the air seemed to thicken with history and longing, the silence broken only by the soft creaking of old wood and the faint whisper of forgotten voices. The playwright's fingers trembled as he pulled an ancient script from his satchel, the pages yellowed and fragile. He settled at the cracked wooden desk near the stage's edge, the flickering candle casting long, dancing shadows that stretched like phantoms across the room. Harold hovered nearby, his gaze fixed on the fragile script, his presence a silent benediction. "Do you remember?" Elias whispered, voice rough and fractured. Harold's eyes glistened, and though no words came, the ghost's presence was a soft murmur of affirmation. The theater itself seemed to respond. A sudden gust stirred the tattered curtains, sending dust motes swirling in the pale light. The faint scent of smoke lingered, a cruel reminder of the fire that had claimed so much. Elias's breath hitched as he imagined the applause that once filled this space, the laughter, the tears, the rapt silence of an audience caught between reality and illusion. Now, only ghosts remained, trapped in a cycle of repetition and regret. Driven by a surge of desperate energy, Elias bent over the script, pen scratching feverishly across the fragile pages. Words poured from him like blood, each line a desperate attempt to mend what was broken, to rewrite the past and wrest control from the relentless tide of memory and guilt. Harold drifted closer, the ghostly figure a steady presence beside the playwright. Invisible to the living, but to Elias, Harold was a tether to the theater's heart, an embodiment of its endurance and sorrow. As the hours slipped by, the theater seemed to breathe with Elias, inhaling his pain and exhaling the echoes of lost dreams. The walls pulsed with a living energy, caught between destruction and salvation, decay and resurrection. But with each word written, the line between the living and the dead blurred further. Elias felt the weight of the theater's breath on his shoulders, a suffocating embrace that both crushed and sustained him. His obsession deepened. The theater was no longer just a place, it was a living, breathing entity that demanded sacrifice and devotion, and Elias was its willing prisoner. Outside the shattered windows, the night pressed in, cold and implacable. But inside, the theater stirred with life, fragile, spectral, and eternal. And Elias, haunted and consumed, continued to write. The candle flickered, casting one last long shadow before the flame steadied. The theater exhaled its timeless breath, and the stage waited, always waiting for the next performance. The cycle spun on, relentless and unyielding. And somewhere, deep in the silence, Harold watched. The theater breathed with a quiet that was almost sacred, the air thick with the ghosts of memory and the whispered remnants of forgotten lines. Elias Monroe sat alone beneath the shattered chandelier, its crystals dangling like fragile tears caught in the dim light. His hands trembled as he held the worn script, the pages stained with years of obsessive rewriting, the ink smudged where his fingers had traced the words in desperate hope. Around him, the spectral cast gathered, their forms shimmering faintly in the muted gloom. Lena stood by the cracked proscenium arch, her ethereal light casting soft shadows on the dust-laden floor. Harold lingered near the wings, the embodiment of the theater's long and sorrowful history. At the center, Adan, the lead ghost, moved silently, his eyes pools of sorrow and understanding. The actors began a silent performance, a tableau of intertwined sorrows. Their faces spoke without words: pain, longing, regret, but also, beneath it all, a fragile light, a glimmer of hope that shimmered like the first dawn after a storm. Elias's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, the oppressive weight of guilt loosened its grip, and he felt something he had not dared to hope for in years: redemption. Clara's voice broke through the stillness, soft yet resolute. "Elias," she said, stepping forward, her calm presence steadying the storm within him. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore. There's peace beyond this cycle. You must let it go." He looked up, eyes haunted but searching, meeting her steady gaze. "I can't," he whispered, "not yet. There's still more to write, more to fix." Her hands reached out, trembling with the weight of love and sacrifice. Sometimes the hardest act of creation is surrender. Adan approached then, his translucent form wavering like a candle flame in the dark. His voice was low, filled with both accusation and compassion. "Elias, we are not your punishment, nor your burden. We are the echoes of your pain, yes, but also of your love. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is release." The theater itself seemed to breathe around them, the dust motes swirling like suspended memories in the pale light. Elias's heart pounded, caught between the desperate urge to rewrite and the whispered promise of peace. Yet as the ghost's hopeful glow flickered, shadows lengthened and deepened. The weight of the fire, the loss of his wife and friend, the endless nights of torment, they pressed in once more, threatening to snuff out the fragile light like dying embers. Alias sank back into his chair, the script slipping from his fingers. His mind spun with the fragile possibilities and the relentless pull of obsession. The ghost stories, their intertwined sorrows and hopes, lingered in the air like a whispered promise, but the path to redemption remained shrouded in darkness. The night deepened, and the theater held its breath, a silent witness to a man caught between the consuming fire of his past and the faint, flickering whisper of redemption yet to come. But even as the fragile hope glimmered, Alias knew the hardest act was still ahead, whether he could embrace release or be consumed forever by the stage that burned within him. And so the echoes continued, the silent theater holding its secrets, waiting for the next act to unfold beneath its haunted roof. The script was not yet finished. The air within the ruined theater thickened like a storm gathering strength. Ilias Monroe stood at center stage, the worn wood beneath his trembling feet creaking in protest as unseen forces stirred the shadows. Around him, the spectral cast ghosts summoned through his obsession, and pain swirled in a tempest of fractured scenes and anguished cries. The theater, a crumbling husk of its former glory, seemed to pulse and groan as if alive, straining beneath the weight of memories it held captive. A sudden crash echoed through the hollow space. Scenery, long decayed and half collapsed, shuddered and fell in pieces. The ghostly actors, caught in the maelstrom of Alias' unraveling mind, erupted into chaotic movement, their voices overlapping in a discordant chorus of grief and rage. Adan, the lead ghost, his pale form flickering like a candle's flame, stood tall amid the chaos, eyes blazing with sorrow and accusation. Elias, Adan's voice cut through the tumult, haunting and raw. Look at what you've done. The fire that stole us, the play that consumed us, still you rewrite, still you deny release. Elias' breath came in ragged gasps, his hands shaking as he clutched the tattered script. I need to fix it, he whispered, voice breaking. I need to make it right this time. But the ghosts would not be tamed. Lena, her shimmering figure gliding silently across the stage, wept spectral tears that shimmered like dew. Harold, a shadowy outline behind the curtains, gestured frantically, adjusting invisible ropes and pulleys, his presence a reminder of the theater's living history. The past and present collided violently, a tempest of memory and pain. Offstage, voices rose in a sharp, discordant duet. Clara's soft but urgent tone pleaded, Alias, this obsession is killing you. Let them go. Let yourself go. Marcus' voice countered, bitter and unyielding, the theater is a ruin, Elias. Your dreams burned with it. It's time to face the truth, move on, or be consumed. The clash of compassion and condemnation echoed through the hollow walls, tugging at Elias' fraying sanity. He staggered, caught between the spectral past and the harsh reality pressing in. A sudden tremor rippled through the foundation, dust falling like ash from the cracked ceiling. The theater groaned, a living beast bearing the scars of tragedy and art entwined. Alias sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the crushing weight of guilt and longing. Please, he begged, eyes searching Aidan's ghostly gaze. Tell me how to end this, how to save you, and myself. Aidan's form softened, sorrow replacing accusation. Acceptance, he murmured, not control. Release, not repetition. The air stilled, the chaos ebbing, leaving a fragile silence pregnant with possibility. Elias' heart pounded as the theater held its breath, waiting for the choice that would decide their fate. And in that moment, the clashing worlds of art and pain, memory and reality poised on the edge of transformation or destruction. The night stretched on, the final act yet unwritten, the stage still burning forever in shadows and light. The theater was still but never quiet. The shadows clung to the broken seats and shredded curtains like old regrets, and in the center of the ruined stage, Alias Monroe stood, clutching a sheaf of scrawled pages as if they were the last tether to a world slipping fast from his grasp. His eyes, sunken and wild, darted toward the flickering shape emerging from the deep gloom. A pale figure, spectral and impossibly thin, stepped forward from the darkness. It was Aidan, the lead ghost, the man whose life Elias had unwittingly trapped in an endless loop of torment. Aidan's eyes, bright and haunted, fixed on Elias with a weight that seemed to press down on the very air. "Do you see what you have done?" His voice was a whisper and a lament all at once, carrying the ache of 1,000 lost moments. "Do you understand the fire you set inside this place, inside us?" Elias blinked, a cold sweat breaking across his forehead. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat, choked by years of denial. "I wanted to fix it," he stammered, voice barely more than a breath. "Fix." Aidan's gaze sharpened, cutting through the layers of self-delusion like a knife. "You rewrote us into suffering. You chained us to your guilt, your obsession. We are trapped because you cannot let go." The heavy silence that followed was broken only by the distant groan of the crumbling theater, as if the building itself mourned alongside its spectral inhabitants. Elias sank to his knees, clutching the script like a talisman, the pages trembling in his grasp. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words empty but aching with truth. "Sorry is a word," Aidan said softly, stepping closer, "but it cannot undo the past, it cannot free us, only release can." From the shadows at the edge of the stage, Clara watched with a tightening in her chest. Her presence was a fragile thread to the living world, a silent plea for Elias to remember who he was beyond the haunted playwright imprisoned by his own making. Yet Elias seemed lost, swallowed by the ghosts of a tragedy he could neither escape nor amend. "You held us in your hands," Aidan continued, voice breaking with sorrow, "and yet you saw us only as echoes, ghosts to be rewritten, not as the souls who lived and died here. Your obsession has become a cage, Elias, but cages can be opened, if only you find the key." Elias's breath hitched. The script slipped from his fingers, fluttering like wounded wings onto the stage floor. The theater shuddered, the walls resonating with the weight of unspoken grief. His mind, frayed and fractured, teetered on the edge of collapse. He saw then, with a clarity that pierced his soul, the ruin his fixation had wrought, the lost lives, the pain unspoken, the cycles of repetition that had become his prison as well. "How," Elias whispered, voice raw and trembling, "how do I set you free? How do I release myself?" Aidan's form began to fade, the edges of his spectral self dissolving like mist in the dawn. "By letting go," he said, a final benediction laced with hope and sorrow. "By accepting the past and choosing to no longer rewrite it. It is the hardest step, but the only one that leads to peace." As the last words echoed through the hollow theater, Elias was left alone with the empty silence and the fluttering pages at his feet. The ghost's presence lingered like a fading breath, and for the first time in years, the relentless cycle seemed to waver. Clara stepped forward, her voice a gentle anchor. "You don't have to do this alone." Elias looked up, tears streaking down his pale cheeks, and for the first time, he saw not just the ruins around him, but the fragile path toward a reckoning long overdue. The stage that burned forever flickered once more, not with fire, but with the faintest glimmer of hope. He rose slowly, the weight of guilt and sorrow still heavy but no longer crushing. The reckoning had come. The question now was what he would do with it. And in the echoing silence of the ruined theater, the first fragile notes of redemption began to stir. The shattered glass lay scattered across the cold wooden floor like fallen stars, each fragment catching the flickering candlelight and fracturing the darkness into 1,000 splinters. Elias Monroe crouched before the broken mirror, his fingers trembling as they hovered over the jagged edges. The air in the ruined theater was thick with silence, yet it hummed with a spectral energy, a restless pulse that seemed to seep from the very walls, steeped in memory and sorrow. His breath came in shallow gasps, each exhale a mist that mingled with the dust motes swirling in the dim light. In the broken surface before him, Elias's reflection was no longer whole. His face fractured into shards, each piece twisting and distorting, shifting shape like the surface of a disturbed pond. But it was not just his own visage that danced within the fragments. Ghostly faces emerged, their features pale and wavering, Aidan's eyes shimmering with a haunting blend of sorrow and accusation, Lena's silent gaze heavy with unspoken grief, Harold's shadowed outline fading into the edges. They whispered, voices like a mournful breeze, swirling around him, weaving a tapestry of pain and regret. You broke us. Aidan's voice was a fragile echo, both a plea and a verdict. Elias's hands clenched into fists, nails biting into his palms, grounding himself against the flood of memories crashing through his mind. I tried to save you, he whispered, voice raw and hoarse. I tried to fix what I destroyed. The ghosts' faces blurred and merged, their expressions shifting from sorrow to fury, then to pleading. The theater around him seemed to breathe, the cracked boards creaking softly, the faded velvet curtains fluttering as if stirred by an unseen wind. Shadows lengthened and twisted, crawling along the walls like living things. A sudden weight settled on Elias's shoulders, a heaviness born of guilt and despair that threatened to crush the fragile remnants of his sanity. He staggered back, breath hitching, heart pounding in frantic desperation. The fractured mirror had become a portal, exposing not only the ghosts of those lost, but the shattered pieces of himself he had tried to deny. In the doorway, a soft rustle broke the oppressive stillness. Clara stepped cautiously into the room, her footsteps light against the worn floor. Her presence was a balm, a tether to the world Elias was slipping from. She knelt beside him, her hands gentle as they brushed away a stray lock of damp hair from his forehead. Elias, she murmured, voice steady though edged with sorrow. You don't have to carry this alone. Let me help you, please. Her eyes, soft pools of compassion, searched his haunted gaze. In them Elias glimpsed a fragile hope, a chance at salvation he was too terrified to grasp. I'm broken, he confessed, voice barely audible. I don't know how to be whole again. Clara's hand tightened reassuringly. Then let me be part of your healing. We can face this together. But before Elias could respond, the heavy thud of footsteps echoed from the theater's entrance. Marcus appeared, his sharp features carved in the gloom, dark suit a stark contrast against the ruin. His gaze was cold, unyielding, a harsh reminder of the world Elias was desperate to escape. This ends now, Elias, Marcus said, voice edged with finality. You were losing yourself, dragging everyone down with you. The theater, the play, it's poison. You need to let go. Elias felt the weight of Marcus's words, brutal and unforgiving, pressing down like the walls of a collapsing tomb. Yet within the harshness, there was a strange clarity, a painful truth he could no longer deny. As the tension thickened, a chill swept through the room. From the shadows behind Elias, a pale figure emerged, Aidan, the lead ghost, shimmering with ethereal light. His gaze locked onto Elias, eyes filled with a sorrow deeper than the night itself. Silent, he reached out a translucent hand, a gesture both accusatory and pleading. Elias's breath caught. The theater seemed to pulse with an oppressive energy, the boundary between past and present dissolving into a suffocating haze. The ghosts, the memories, the shattered reflections all converged in a tumultuous storm within his mind. Torn between the love and hope Clara offered and the merciless reality Marcus embodied, Elias found himself at the edge of an abyss. The fractured mirror before him was no longer just glass, it was the shattered essence of his soul. Who am I now? He whispered, voice breaking. Without them, without the play, what remains? The ghosts faded slowly, the theater's breath settling into a heavy silence. Clara's hand remained warm in his, Marcus's stern eyes never leaving him. And in the quiet, Elias understood that the path forward would demand something he had long resisted, the courage to face the shattered pieces and forge a new self from the ruins. The night stretched on, the future uncertain, but a fragile ember of hope flickered in the darkness. As Elias rose unsteadily to his feet, the shattered mirror caught a final glint of candlelight, a fractured reflection, but a reflection nonetheless, waiting to be made whole. The stage was set. The final act had yet to begin. The air inside the ruined theater was thick with a palpable tension, as if the very walls held their breath in anticipation. Elias Monroe sat hunched at the battered wooden desk that had once served as the playwright's altar, now scarred by years of neglect and the ghosts of past performances. A single candle flickered weakly, casting long, wavering shadows that danced upon the cracked plaster and soot-stained beams overhead. His fingers trembled as they gripped the pen, moving feverishly across the yellowed pages, rewriting lines, erasing words. and scrawling new passages in a desperate bid to mend the fractures that had splintered his life and trapped so many souls in eternal torment. The room pulsed with an otherworldly energy, the very air vibrating with the whispers of the spectral cast summoned nightly by his obsession. The ghostly figures swirled around him, their translucent forms shimmering like mist caught in moonlight. Their voices rose in a haunting chorus, weaving through the silence with fragmented lines and mournful sighs, a dissonant symphony of pain and longing. Alias's eyes, hollow and haunted, flicked between the page and the apparitions, his heart pounding with a frenetic mixture of dread and hope. From the shadowed wings of the stage, Adon emerged, the lead ghost's pale face illuminated by the flickering candlelight. His ethereal eyes, deep wells of sorrow and accusation, locked onto Elias's with an intensity that stole the breath from the playwright's lungs. Adon's remnants of the stage costume hung loosely on his spectral frame, a ghostly echo of the man he had been before the fire claimed him. He stepped forward, the floorboards creaking faintly beneath his intangible feet, his presence commanding yet laden with grief. The theater seemed to breathe around them, the broken rafters creaking as if alive, the shadows deepening and retreating in a restless rhythm. Elias met Adon's gaze, the weight of unspoken words pressing down upon him. The playwright's voice cracked as he whispered, "I'm trying to fix it, to set you free." Adon's expression was a mixture of pleading and reproach, his voice a ghostly echo that trembled through the air. "You cannot rewrite the past, Elias. You can only live with its ashes." Before Elias could respond, a soft footfall interrupted the charged silence. Clara appeared at the threshold of the stage, her calm presence a stark contrast to the chaos around them. Her eyes, warm and steady, searched Elias's face with a mixture of compassion and quiet urgency. "You don't have to do this alone," she said gently, stepping closer. "Let go of the guilt. Let yourself breathe." Elias's hands faltered on the pen, and for a fleeting moment, the torment that had consumed him seemed to waver. The ghosts around them quieted, their forms dimming, as if sensing the fragile humanity rekindled in the playwright's heart. Yet the theater would not remain still for long. A low rumble surged through the broken walls, and spectral flames flickered along the scorched beams, casting eerie light upon the ruins. The ghosts rose in a crescendo of anguished performance, their voices rising in a tumultuous wave of sorrow and rage. Scenes from the play unfolded with vivid intensity: the fire, the screams, the shattered dreams, each echoing the devastating cost of Elias's creation. Elias's voice rose above the spectral tumult, his final words inscribed with feverish determination. "Let this be the end, the last act." As the echoes of his declaration faded, the theater seemed to shudder, caught between destruction and salvation. The ghosts' forms wavered, some reaching toward the light beyond the ruins, others fading into the shadows. Elias felt the weight of years lift slightly, a fragile hope blossoming amidst the ashes. But the price was not without peril. His body trembled, the strain of obsession and creation threatening to unravel him completely. Clara's hand found his, steadying and warm, a tether to the world he had almost lost. Marcus's distant voice pierced the chaos, a reminder of the harsh judgments waiting beyond these haunted walls. In this crucible of memory and pain, Elias Monroe stood at the edge of oblivion and redemption, his final rewrite a desperate plea to break the cycle. The stage that burned forever held its breath, awaiting the playwright's next move, one that would decide the fate of the ghosts, the theater, and himself. The candle guttered, casting one last flicker of light before darkness embraced the room. And in that silence, a fragile new beginning whispered its promise. The air hung heavy with a strange heat, unnatural and suffocating, as if the theater itself had caught fire anew. Elias Monroe stood at the center of the ruins, surrounded by the skeletal remains of broken seats and shattered stage props, the smell of smoke lingering though no flame burned. Yet in the flickering shadows cast by some unseen light, the theater seemed alive with spectral embers, glowing faintly like the dying coals of a fire that refused to extinguish. Around him, the ghostly figures of his lost cast stirred, their forms shimmering and wavering as if caught between worlds. The flicker of their presence was like a dance of ashes in a restless wind, fragile, mournful, relentless. Alias's breath came in ragged bursts, his thin frame trembling as the weight of the past pressed down on him like a stone. From the shadows emerged Aidan, the lead ghost, his pale features etched with sorrow and rage. His haunting eyes met Elias's, burning with a light that was both accusation and plea. "Do you see now, Ilias?" Aidan's voice was low, a tremor in the heavy silence. "The theater burns because you will not let it die, because you refuse to release us." Elias's fingers clenched into fists, nails biting into his palms. "I'm trying," he whispered, voice cracking. "I'm trying to fix it. To make it right, fix it." Aidan's laugh was bitter, hollow. "The fire took us because of your obsession, not the play, not the art. It was your guilt, your denial, that fed the flames. And now you've trapped us here, night after night, reliving the pain you won't face." As Aidan spoke, the theater seemed to pulse, the walls shimmering with spectral fire that cast an eerie glow over the cracked wood and peeling paint. The ghosts of the cast swirled like smoke around Elias, their faces twisted in silent cries and mournful gazes. Lena drifted through the haze, her apparition barely more than a whisper of light. Her eyes locked with Elias's, and in their depths was a fragile hope, a silent forgiveness that he felt sear through his soul. She reached out, a hand trembling with longing, but her form flickered and faded before he could touch her. The creak of timber and the soft footfalls of Harold, the stagehand ghost, echoed through the theater. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, embodying the theater's long, tormented history. The air around him was thick with the weight of unspoken memories, the ghosts of countless performances past. Elias sank to his knees amid the ghostly flames, the heat searing but the fire intangible. "I'm sorry," he choked out, tears streaming down his gaunt cheeks. "I never meant for this. For any of it." The ghosts paused, their spectral forms still in the suspended moment. Aidan stepped closer, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "Then let it end. Let us go. Let yourself go." For a long moment, Elias remained still, the theater alive with the crackling of spectral fire and the heavy silence of waiting. Then slowly, with a trembling hand, he reached toward the tattered script, lying at his feet, the play that had consumed him, that had destroyed everything he loved. With a deep, shuddering breath, Elias tore the pages free, letting the fragments drift into the spectral flames. As the paper burned without smoke or ash, a profound stillness settled over the theater. The ghosts' faces softened, the torment in their eyes fading like mist. The fire died down to a faint glow, then to nothing. The theater fell silent, the oppressive heat replaced by a cool, gentle breeze that whispered through the broken rafters. Elias rose slowly, feeling the weight of years lift from his shoulders, though the scars of guilt and loss remained etched deep within him. He looked around at the empty seats and shattered stage, the place that had been both prison and sanctuary, and for the first time saw it as a place of endings and perhaps beginnings. As he stepped toward the exit, a faint echo of applause brushed against his ears, a ghostly reminder of what had been, and what might still be remembered. The stage that had burned forever was silent at last, but its story would linger in the hearts of those who dared to remember the fragile beauty born from pain. Outside, the cold night air embraced him, sharp and real. The theater behind him stood quiet, a monument to loss and redemption intertwined. Elias walked away, carrying the ashes of his past, but with a tentative hope flickering within a hope that even from ruin, something new might one day rise. And as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the stage that burned forever settled into silence, its flames extinguished but never forgotten. The air in the ruined theater was thick with a silence, so deep it seemed to press against the very bones of the structure. Elias Monroe stood alone on the center of the cracked stage, clutching the worn script that had long been both his torment and his salvation. The faded ink, smeared and fragile, was a mirror of his own unraveling mind. Around him, the spectral forms of the cast began to materialize, their outlines shimmering like smoke caught in the last light of dusk. They were thin, fragile, haunted ghosts not just of flesh and blood, but of memory and pain. Elias's breath came slow and measured, the weight of years pressing down upon him like the heavy curtain that had long since fallen on this place of tragedy. The faces around him, once vibrant with life and passion, now flickered with sorrow and longing. Aidan, the lead ghost, stepped forward, his pale eyes meeting Elias's with a depth of grief that crossed the boundaries of life and death. "It ends tonight," Aidan said, his voice a haunting melody that filled the space, trembling with both accusation and forgiveness. Elias nodded, his voice barely more than a whisper. "It must. I cannot live this endless night anymore." The ghosts moved closer, their forms ebbing and flowing like waves of mist. Lena's delicate figure hovered near the edge of the stage, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. Harold, the stagehand ghost, lingered in the shadows, a silent witness to the final act of a tragedy that had spanned decades. Clara entered softly from the wings, her presence a tether to the fragile world of the living. She approached Elias, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, steadying him as the weight of his decision pressed down. "You are not alone," she said, her voice full of warmth and quiet strength. "Let go, Elias, it's time." The theater seemed to breathe around them, the dust motes catching the faint moonlight that filtered through the broken roof. The ghosts began to dissolve, their forms thinning and fading like the last embers of a fire dying to ash. With each breath, Elias felt the chains of obsession loosening, the relentless cycle of pain and repetition beginning to break. Aidan's voice lingered a moment longer, a final benediction whispered in the stillness. "Remember us not as victims, but as part of the story you must finally set free." Elias closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a line down his worn face. When he opened them again, the theater was empty, bathed in a serene silence that spoke of endings and beginnings. The stage that had burned so fiercely with the fires of creation and destruction now lay quiet, a monument to the fragile beauty of art intertwined with suffering. He stepped forward, the weight of the past still heavy but no longer suffocating. The silence was not emptiness, it was peace. And for the first time in years, Elias felt the tentative stirrings of hope. Outside, the night sky stretched wide and infinite, stars flickering like distant promises. The stage that burned forever was silent at last, but its story etched in memory, pain, and redemption would echo in the shadows. A haunting refrain of the human heart's relentless quest for meaning. Elias took a deep breath and let the script fall from his hands. The cycle was broken, the ghosts were free, and so, perhaps, was he. The theater breathed a heavy silence, a quiet that felt both oppressive and cleansing. Elias Monroe stood at center stage, the boards beneath him creaking softly under his weight, as if the very bones of the place were whispering secrets too old to remember fully. The air was thick with the scent of dust, charred timber, and something faintly floral, perhaps a trace of the flowers Clara had once brought, or the memory of a long-forgotten bouquet left to wither in the wings. His eyes, bloodshot and rimmed with fatigue, scanned the shadows that clung to the theater's edges, where faint flickers of light danced like restless spirits. The ghosts of the cast had long since ceased their nightly torment, their forms no longer coalescing with the clarity and anger they once wielded. Instead, they lingered like soft echoes, wisps of memory caught in the corners of Elias's mind and the fractured theater alike. He could feel their presence as one might feel a chill in a room long after a fire has died down, a residual heat that refused to vanish. Among them, Aidan's pale gaze was the most vivid, a haunting reminder of all that had been lost and all that could never be reclaimed. Elias's breath fogged in the chill of the empty space as he sank slowly to the floorboards, the weight of years pressing down on his chest. The relentless cycle was over, but the residue of pain remained, etched deep into his soul. He whispered the lines he had rewritten so many times, the words now hollow but still heavy with meaning. "We are the echoes," he murmured, "the shadows of what was and what might have been." A soft creak from the entrance made Elias look up. Clara stepped inside, her presence a warm contrast to the desolation around them. Her eyes were gentle but resolute, carrying the steadiness that had anchored him through his darkest nights. "You re here," she said simply. He nodded, managing a faint, wary smile. And yet, somehow not alone, she moved closer, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. The ghosts will always be a part of you, Elias. But they don't have to chain you. You can carry their memory without being imprisoned by it. Her words were a salve, stirring a fragile hope that had seemed impossible moments before. They sat together in the quiet, the theater's silence no longer a shackle but a space for healing. Yet the peace was fragile. The past was a specter that would not be fully exorcised. Their moment was interrupted by the sudden sound of footsteps echoing through the empty hall. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his sharp features etched with tension. His gaze flicked between Elias and Clara, a mixture of skepticism and reluctant respect in his eyes. "You're still here," Marcus said, voice low but carrying the weight of accusation and concern. "Do you really think this place can hold anything but ghosts and ruin?" Elias met his gaze, the fire of defiance flickering within his wary eyes. "It holds more than ruin. It holds memory. It holds truth." Marcus's lips tightened, but the edge of his bitterness softened. "Just don't let it consume you." With that, Marcus turned and left, his footsteps fading into the theater's shadows. Elias exhaled slowly, the encounter a stark reminder of the world beyond the crumbling walls and the delicate balance he now walked. As night deepened, Elias found himself alone once more, the weight of solitude pressing in. Yet in the stillness, he sensed a presence, not the accusing glare of Aiden, but something quieter, a final sigh from the past. The lead ghost's ethereal figure shimmered faintly beneath the cracked stage lights, eyes no longer filled with wrath but with a solemn farewell. Elias rose, his voice barely a whisper. "Goodbye, Aidan." The apparition nodded once, sorrowful and serene, before fading into the darkness. The theater remained silent, but the echoes of its tragic beauty lingered, woven into the very fabric of the night. Elias stepped back into the cool air beyond the doors, carrying with him the scars and the stories, the pain and the art forever intertwined. Ahead lay the uncertain path of healing and hope, shadowed yet illuminated by the fragile light of remembrance. Outside, the wind whispered through the empty streets, carrying the faintest hint of applause, as if the stage that burned forever still held a promise beyond the ashes. The air within the ruined theater was still, an oppressive quiet that pressed against Elias Monroe's chest as he lingered on the threshold of the stage that had been both his sanctuary and his prison. Dust motes danced in the pale moonlight filtering through fractured windows, and the timbers groaned softly, as if the building itself exhaled a long-held breath. Elias's gaze swept across the cracked floorboards, the charred remnants of set pieces, and the faded remnants of velvet curtains, ghostly traces of a world once vibrant with life, and now swallowed by ruin. For years he had been bound to this place, trapped in a relentless loop of rewriting, and rewriting the play that had consumed his life and the lives of those he loved. Each night, the spectral cast had returned, their sorrow and rage etched into the air like smoke. Tonight, however, felt different. The ghosts were silent. The theater seemed to hold its breath. Elias's fingers trembled as he clutched the dog-eared script, its pages worn thin from obsessive revisions. He lowered it slowly, the familiar weight no longer a tether, but a relic of a past he was finally ready to face. The silence wrapped around him, heavy yet strangely comforting, as if the theater mourned with him, acknowledging the end of its relentless torment. A soft sound stirred behind him, a cautious step against the dusty floor. Clara emerged from the shadows, her presence calm and steady. Her eyes, always so full of compassion and quiet strength, searched his face. "It's time," she said softly, her voice a balm to the turmoil within him. Elias met her gaze, the haunted depths of his eyes flickering with a fragile light. "I don't know if I can," he whispered, the weight of years pressing down, "but I have to try." Together, they moved toward the exit, the theater's darkness receding behind them. As Elias stepped beyond the threshold, a chill night breeze greeted him, carrying the distant hum of a city that had long since moved on. The stark contrast between the fading shadows of the theater and the faint glow of life beyond was almost unbearable, a reminder of all he had lost and all that might yet be. Outside, the world was vast and unknowable, but for the first time in countless nights, Elias felt a cautious stir of hope. The play's tragic legacy remained etched into the walls behind him, a testament to the consuming fire of creation and the cost it exacted. Yet, as he breathed in the cold air, he understood that while the stage had burned forever, so had a part of himself been forged anew in its ashes. Clara stayed close, her steady presence a tether to the world he had almost forgotten. "We'll take it one step at a time," she said gently, and Elias nodded, the faintest smile touching his lips. The theater stood silent in the night, a monument to art and pain, obsession and redemption, a place where memories lingered like smoke and the past was never truly gone. But tonight, its grip had loosened, and Elias Monroe had taken the first step toward a future unwritten. As they disappeared into the darkness, a single beam of moonlight caught the cracked stage floor, illuminating the faint outline of a flame silent, eternal, and unyielding. The stage that burned forever would live on in memory, but for Elias the fire had finally begun to die down. The night whispered its farewell as the city's distant lights twinkled like stars, and a new dawn waited just beyond the horizon. Elias's journey was far from over, but for the first time, it was a journey toward peace.